What is it? What do you see? Let me through!
Hey, Jeff, Professor, they're becoming visible.
What's up, Vault Dwellers? So today, we're diving into the beautiful world of practical effect nightmares, with 13 of the most insane creature features ever to crawl, slither, or shamble across the silver screen. These are the films where the monsters were created with household materials, spray foam, and pure imagination, where sometimes you can literally see the zipper on the creature's back. And that's exactly why we love them. From atomic mutations to alien invaders, from shrews that are clearly dogs in carpets to crabs that are clearly puppets on strings. These beautiful disasters remind us why practical effects, even bad ones, have a charm that pixels they can never replace. So grab your radiation detector, keep an eye on the skies, and let's take a tour through the wonderful world of creature features.
Johnson!
All right, let's get started with the monster that challenged the world from 1957, which was about atomic testing in the Salton Sea that unleashed prehistoric mollusks the size of school buses. And it's up to a no-nonsense Navy commander to save California from death by escargot. These oversized snails move with the terrifying speed of snails, but they make up for their lack of agility with deadly poison and an insatiable appetite for sailors. It's like if Gary from SpongeBob had a midlife crisis and decided to become a serial killer. You know what elevates this film above the other atomic monster movies of the era? It's the surprising quality of the creature effects. These giant mollusks, created by special effects maestro Augie Lohman, are genuinely unsettling with their pulsating bodies and extendable tentacles. The underwater photography adds to the creepiness, making the Salton Sea seem like an alien environment where just anything could be lurking. The film takes itself completely seriously, with Tim Holt's commander approaching the mollusk threat with the same gravity he would a Soviet invasion. This straight-faced approach to such a ridiculous premise creates the perfect B-movie sweet spot. Absurd enough to be entertaining, but earnest enough to be engaging. Plus, it features what might be cinema's only romantic subplot that develops while the characters are studying mollusk slime under a microscope. Now that's what I call chemistry. All right, let's talk about the Killer Shrews from 1959, which brought us scientists conducting experiments on a remote island, and they accidentally create giant shrews. And on this island, we have a group of stranded boat passengers who now have to fight for survival against these ravenous beasts. And by giant shrews, I mean dogs wearing carpet and fake teeth attached to their snouts. This is what happens when your creature feature budget consists of whatever pound puppies you could borrow and whatever you could use from a good dumpster dive. Director Ray Kellogg creates genuine tension despite the limitations of his budget. The siege scenario, where people are trapped in a house, surrounded by these hungry monsters, it actually works, even when the monsters are clearly someone's pets in bad costumes. The film benefits from surprisingly decent acting, particularly from James Best, who you would remember from Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane on The Dukes of Hazzard. And he delivers lines about the deadly nature of giant shrews with just complete conviction. It's the perfect example of how enthusiasm and creativity can sometimes overcome a non-existent budget.
We are here! Show yourself!
Next up is Attack of the Crab Monsters in 1957, and this is a Roger Corman crustacean creature feature, which follows a group of scientists on a remote island where nuclear testing has created giant, telepathic, voice-stealing crabs. These budget-conscious monsters absorb the minds of their victims and can speak using their voices, which makes for some genuinely creepy moments until you actually see the crabs, which look like they were purchased from a particularly unambitious seafood restaurant for decoration. So Corman, the godfather of B-movies, he knew that the less you show of a monster, the scarier it is. Partly because it's more mysterious, but mostly because he just couldn't afford good monster effects. The film creates genuine suspense through the crab's ability to absorb their victims' minds and then speak telepathically, leading to scenes where dead colleagues warn the living scientists of impending doom. It's surprisingly existential horror for a film with crab monsters in the title. The movie also benefits from a script by Charles B. Griffith that includes actual scientific ideas and philosophical concepts, creating dialogue that's several notches above the standard "it's coming, run" type of, similar films. Of course, all this thoughtfulness goes right out the window whenever the actual crab monsters appear, looking like papier-mâché nightmares operated by visible wires. But that's just part of the charm. All right, at number 10, we've got The Beast from Haunted Cave, way back from 1959. And this is a strange genre mashup about a group of gangsters who are pulling a gold heist that take refuge in a cave, only to encounter a spider-like monster with the taste for human flesh. It's kind of like Ocean's 11 that took a wrong turn and ended up in a monster movie, which is exactly the kind of cinematic collision that makes B-movies so special. Directed by Monty Hellman, who, would later become known for cult classics like Two-Lane Blacktop, Beast from Haunted Cave reveals its art house ambitions despite its B-movie budget. The creature itself, it's a wonderful example of low-budget ingenuity, a spindly, web-spinning monstrosity created with what appears to be pipe cleaners, cotton, and the kind of nightmare fuel that keeps special effects artists awake at night. The film's most effective scenes come when the beast is barely visible, lurking in the shadows of the cave or appearing as a silhouette against the snowy landscape. But when fully revealed, well, let's just say it's more charming than terrifying. What elevates this monster movie is its unusual structure, spending significant time as a heist plot and character dynamics before introducing the creature. This creates actual stakes when the monster starts picking them off, and we've had time to get to know these criminals beyond the future monster food scenario. It's a creature feature with just enough film noir elements to make it stand out from the atomic mutation crowd.
God, they're all over out there. Got any gasoline around here?
In the tool shed.
Oh yes, Frogs, 1972. Despite the title, this echo horror film, it doesn't actually feature killer frogs. They're more like the generals in an army of reptiles, insects, and other swamp creatures that rise up against a polluting family. So Ray Milland stars as a wheelchair-bound patriarch who's hosting a birthday gathering at his southern mansion, where nature decides it's had enough of humans messing with the environment. It's like National Geographic made an animal documentary, but kind of like halfway through decided, let's just make them the heroes and kill all the humans. What makes frogs so wonderfully weird? It's how it takes regular-sized animals and makes them threatening simply through ominous croaking and creative editing. There are no giant mutated creatures here, just regular frogs, snakes, lizards, and spiders, filmed in extreme close-up and edited to make it seem like they're plotting humanity's downfall. The film was part of the eco horror trend of the early 70s, using monster movies to address growing environmental concerns, but does so with so delightful cheesiness that any message is just secondary to scenes of people being terrorized by completely normal-sized reptiles. The poster, it famously shows a giant frog with a human hand dangling from its mouth. Something that never actually happens in the film, where the frogs just mainly ribbit menacingly. Oh, by the way, Sam Elliott appears in an early role, and the best scenes involve elaborate deaths where regular animals somehow manage to create Final Destination style killing scenarios, proving that you don't need a giant monster to create a creature feature. Sometimes all you need is a lot of regular creatures and some very, very stupid human characters. Reptilicus from 1961 is a Danish-American co-production about miners that discover a frozen piece of prehistoric tail in Lapland, which naturally regenerates into a full giant reptile when thawed in the lab. Reptilicus then does what any self-respecting movie monster should do. It attacks Copenhagen, eats people, and spits neon green slime that was clearly added in post-production by someone whose understanding of biology came exclusively from watching other monster movies. Reptilicus holds the distinction of being the only giant monster film to come out of Denmark, and boy did they make it count. The monster is realized through a combination of puppetry and miniature sets that make Godzilla look like Avatar in comparison. In the American version, the creature spits radioactive green slime, an effect that was added in post-production and looks exactly like someone just drew green goop on the film with a marker. Yet, there's something undeniably charming about watching the awkward puppet destroy miniature versions of famous Danish landmarks. The film has a distinctly European sensibility despite trying to mimic Japanese and American monster movies, creating this weird cultural hybrid where American military protocols are enacted around distinctly Danish locations. It's a beautiful disaster that stands as proof that the desire to see giant monsters destroying cities, it's truly universal, even if the budget to realize that destruction convincingly is not. So now we're going to talk about The Werewolf and the Yeti from 1975, which is part of a long-running Spanish Waldemar Daninsky werewolf series starring Paul Naschy. Oh, that was a mouthful. This film follows our cursed protagonist into the Himalayas, where he encounters not just the usual full moon problems, but also a Yeti, some evil witches, and more fantastical creatures than you'd expect from a single monster movie. It's like Universal decided to cram all their monster franchises into one film and then just handed the production over to Spanish crew with a tenth of the budget. You know what makes this entry into the werewolf saga so special? It's the kitchen sink approach to monster cinema. Not just content with just a werewolf action. The film throws in abominable snowmen, vampire women, and other assorted horrors, creating a monster mashup decades before such crossovers became common. The creature effects are that, special kind of Euro horror practical work, ambitious, bloody, and just slightly off in a way that makes them more memorable than the more professional Hollywood monsters. Naschy, who wrote the script himself, brings this bodybuilder's physicality and surprising pathos to his werewolf role, creating a monster who's both terrifying and sympathetic. The film's unique Spanish meets Asia horror aesthetic produces visuals unlike anything in American monster movies, with colorful lighting, unexpected visual flourishes, and approach to gore that's simultaneously artistic and excessive. It's Euro horror creature feature excess at the finest, proving that sometimes the most interesting monster movies come from outside of Hollywood. The ever-lovable Gamera. This is Japan's answer to Godzilla, which came out in the form of a giant, fire-breathing, rocket-powered turtle who can fly by pulling his limbs inside his shell and spinning like a flying saucer. If that sentence doesn't immediately make you want to watch this movie, I really don't know what will. This was released to compete with Toho's famous radioactive lizard. Gamera becomes a franchise of its own, spawning numerous sequels and eventually positioning this destructive turtle as a friend to all children. What makes Gamera stand out in the crowded kaiju landscape is its weird mix of genuine monster destruction and increasingly kid-friendly messaging. The original film presents Gamera as a prehistoric creature awakened by nuclear testing, the standard kaiju origin story, who proceeds to wreak havoc across Japan. The suit effects are exactly what you'd hope for: a man in a rubber turtle costume destroying miniature cities with visible glee. The flying sequences, where Gamera tucks into his shell and then spins while flames shoot out, represents peak practical effects creativity, using just everything from spinning models to obvious wires to create something both ridiculous and just strangely charming. Director Noriaki Iyasa, I don't know if I said that right, but I hope so, knew exactly what he was making. A monster movie that could capitalize on both destruction for adults and a lovable turtle for merchandising to kids. While Gamera started as Godzilla copycat, it actually developed its own identity, eventually becoming even more child-oriented than its inspiration, with later films portraying the monster as an explicit defender of the children. It's the perfect example of how even the most blatant rip-offs can develop their own unique charm when executed with enough enthusiasm and flying turtle action. Number 5, the infamous Creeping Terror from 1964. This is often cited as one of the worst monster movies ever made, which is saying something. And the Creeping Terror features a space monster that looks like a large carpet with visible human legs underneath, slowly inching along as victims politely wait to be consumed. Legend has it that the original sound was lost during production, resulting in almost the entire film being covered by narration, explaining what the characters are saying and doing, even as we watch them on screen.
The sergeant reported seeing an amazingly large creature in the aft section of the strange craft. He further reported that it was secured by a kind of metal harness.
What makes the Creeping Terror so magnificently terrible is how every single aspect of filmmaking somehow went wrong in the most entertaining way possible. Director R.J. Nelson, who also stars under the pseudonym Vic Savage, reportedly took money from investors, local businesses, and even cast members, and then delivered this masterpiece of incompetence. The monster itself deserves a special place in the Creature Feature Hall of Fame, a shambling mass of carpet and hanging fabric that moves so slowly that victims must actively work to be caught by it. There are scenes where people just stand still, waiting patiently for the monster to reach them so they can dive headfirst into its mouth opening. The narration creates this unintentionally hilarious disconnect, solemnly describing terrible events while we watch clearly confused actors wander around Lake Tahoe in what appears to be completely unplanned sequences. It's the rare monster movie where the creature, it isn't just the star, it's also a metaphor for the production itself. Shambling, confused, visibly held together by incompetence and blind optimism, yet somehow still managing to devour everything in its path. It's glorious and it transcends awful in a way that makes it essential viewing for B-movie fans. 1954 brings us the monster of Piedras Blancas in 1959, and this creature from the Black Lagoon knockoff follows the rampage of a prehistoric monster in a small lighthouse community. The creature, which looks like, the gill man's cousin who spent too much time at the gym, he develops a habit for decapitating locals, which is, certainly one way to leave an impression on a small town. It's like if you took Universal's classic monster and decided what it really needed was more severed heads and awkward rubber abs. But what makes the monster of Piedras Blancas stand out is how it pushes the boundaries of what's acceptable in 1950s horror. While most creature features of the era relied on implied violence, the film features surprisingly graphic scenes for the time. Director Irvin Berwick, working with, a tiny budget, but some pretty big ambitions, creates genuine suspense by keeping the creature hidden for much of the film, which we know is a great idea, and then delivers a memorable monster when it's finally revealed. The creature suit, designed by Jack Kevin, who worked on Creature from the Black Lagoon, actually, the film also benefits from atmospheric lighthouse and cave locations that provide Gothic ambiance without Gothic prices. It's a perfect example of how independent filmmakers of the era could create effective creature features outside the studio system, delivering monsters just as memorable as their bigger budget counterparts, just with more awkward movements and visible costume seams.
An explosion at high altitude. The mountain is going to blow up.
All right, let's talk about Yongary, Monster from the Deep from 1967, which is a South Korean answer to Godzilla and follows a giant reptilian monster awakened by nuclear testing, because of course, who proceeds to rampage through the country, destroying everything in its path. With a horn on its nose, a taste for oil, Yongary quickly establishes itself as one of the most delightfully random giant monsters in cinema history. What makes Yongary special among kaiju knockoffs is the uniquely Korean perspective on the giant monster formula. While clearly inspired by our favorite 500-foot lizard, Yongary has its own distinct personality, particularly in its strange weakness to ammonia and an oddly specific taste for oil barrels. The miniature work ranges from surprisingly decent to, is that a toy tank? Creating the perfect B-movie disconnect where one shot looks almost convincing, and then the next looks like someone filming their model train set. Despite, or perhaps because of, its budgetary limitations, Yongary earned its place in monster movie history, even getting a 1999 remake that somehow managed to be even more ridiculous than the original. At number 2, we've got The Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman in 1971, which is another entry into the Paul Naschy's epic Waldemar Daninsky Werewolf series. This Spanish horror classic pits our tortured lycanthrope against the corpse of a medieval vampire countess. It's essentially Universal's Monster Rally films, but with more blood, more nudity, and significantly more fog machines. It's just like a Hammer film that produced a monster mashup after a particularly wild night of sangria. The film represents Euro horror at its atmospheric peak, with genuine haunting visuals despite the limited budget. The vampire resurrection scene with, mist pouring over the ancient tomb as blood drips onto the corpse, it creates a gothic mood that rivals anything from the more prestigious horror productions. Naschy, as always, brings surprisingly emotional depth to the werewolf character, making Waldemar both monster and hero as he battles the greater evil of the vampire women. The creature effects, while obviously limited by budget, have this handmade quality that makes them more charming than frightening, particularly the werewolf transformation scenes that consist mainly of him growing increasingly hairy while grimacing intensely at the camera. the vampire women with their flowing gowns, blood-stained mouths, and tendency to appear and disappear in swirls of mist create a dreamily erotic atmosphere that contrasts with the more brutal werewolf attacks. It's the perfect example of how European horror often emphasize mood and atmosphere over expensive effect or logical plotting, creating unforgettable monster movies that feel like beautiful, blood-soaked dreams. At number 1 is our most requested B movie to talk about, with Fiend Without a Face from 1958. So this British sci-fi horror follows an invisible creature that can only be seen when it dies, at which point it's revealed to be flying brains with spinal cord tails. Oh, so lovely. These mental monsters created by a scientist thought experiments and powered by atomic energy, it's 1950s, right? Suck out their victims' brains and the spinal cords through small puncture wounds. You know what makes Fiend Without a Face the crown jewel of creature features? It's its brilliant solution to the low-budget monster problem. Just keep the creature invisible for most of the runtime, and then deliver one of the most memorable monster reveals in B-movie history. The brain creatures, realized through remarkable effective stop-motion animation and genuinely unsettling as they flop and squirm and leap across the screen, their spinal cord tails propelling them through the air with just disturbing agility. The film was surprisingly graphic for 1958, with the brain monsters leaking fluid when shot and making these squelching sounds that must have turned a few stomachs in the theater. Director Arthur Crabtree builds just a genuine suspense during the invisible attacks, and then pays it off with a third act that goes all in on brain monster mayhem. The film even attempts to ground its ridiculous premise in the atomic age fears of the time, with thoughtful discussions about nuclear power that almost, and I say almost, make you forget you're watching a movie about flying brain monsters. It's the perfect B-movie creature feature. Just a ridiculous concept executed with surprising craft, delivering genuine unsettling monsters that burn themselves into your memory, whether you want them to or not. These films remind us why practical creature effects hold a special place in horror history. Even when they're clearly just a guy in a suit or a puppet on a string, there's something tangibly charming about these monsters that even the most expensive CGI, it can't replicate. What makes these creature features so special? It isn't just nostalgia. It's the raw creativity and problem solving that went into bringing these monsters to life with limited resources. Modern CGI can create anything a filmmaker can imagine, but these practical effects, they require imagination and ingenuity to create something memorable, from rubber to paint and maybe a few pipe cleaners. So before you go and watch a modern monster movie somewhere else, where every creature looks like it was rendered on the same hard drive, just remember there's some beautiful chaos of practical effects right here on this channel with these other videos, where sometimes the most effective monsters are the ones where you can see the zipper, but you're having too much fun to care. Keep it weird, folks.